Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you have ever known might not be real. Your body, your memories, your past, the people you love, the world around you. Not broken, not fake in an obvious way, just not fundamental. For most of human history, reality felt unquestionable. What we see exists. What we touch is real. Time moves forward. The universe simply is. Reality felt solid, but today something has changed. Some of the most respected physicists, philosophers, and computer scientists on Earth are openly questioning the nature of reality itself, and many of them are reaching the same disturbing conclusion. Reality may not be the base layer. Reality may be a simulation, not as a metaphor, not as science fiction, not as a movie plot, as a serious scientific possibility. At first, this idea sounds absurd, almost insulting. We tend to imagine simulations as crude imitations, pixelated worlds, obvious glitches, artificial characters repeating scripted lines, but that assumption is deeply flawed. If a civilization is advanced enough to simulate conscious minds, then the simulation would not look fake. It would look exactly like this: a coherent universe, stable physical laws, consistent cause and effect, a reality that feels continuous and self-contained. In other words, a reality that feels real. And this is where the problem begins, because if simulated realities are possible at all, then probability becomes our enemy. Imagine a civilization that survives long enough to reach an advanced technological stage. At that point, creating simulated worlds would be trivial. Not one simulation, not 10, but millions. Entire universes, entire histories, entire populations of conscious beings. Now ask yourself a simple question. If there is one base reality and millions of simulated realities, where is the average conscious being most likely to exist? Not in the original world, but inside a simulation. This is known as the simulation argument, and it was formalized by philosopher Nick Bostrom. The argument does not claim that we are in a simulation. It claims something far more unsettling. If simulations exist, then statistically, it is overwhelmingly more likely that we are simulated than real. No evil creators required, no hidden agenda, just math. And this idea is taken seriously by people who design computers, by people who study quantum mechanics, by people who understand how information works at a fundamental level. But here's the truly terrifying part. If we were living inside a simulation, there would be no obvious way to tell. Every limitation would appear as a law of physics. Every constraint would feel fundamental. Every unanswered question would be labeled something we don't understand yet. The speed of light would not feel like a processing limit. It would feel like a cosmic constant. Quantum randomness would not feel like noise. It would feel like true uncertainty. Even time itself would feel natural. And death? Death would make perfect sense. A clean termination of a process, a way to free resources, a way to reset variables. Nothing supernatural required. When you think about it this way, reality begins to feel less like a place and more like a system. And systems have rules, limits, boundaries, resolution, which raises a dangerous question. What if the universe doesn't behave like a naturally existing thing? What if it behaves like something being computed? Because when physicists look deep enough into reality, they don't find solid matter. They find energy, fields, probabilities, information. And the deeper they look, the more reality starts to resemble code. Not literally lines of text, but discrete states, minimum units. A universe that only updates when observed. A universe that does not exist independently of measurement, which is exactly how a simulation would work. And this brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all. If we are inside a simulation, then everything we believe about existence is built on an assumption, the assumption that this is the original reality. But what if it isn't? What if we are not the creators, but the created? To understand why this idea refuses to go away, we need to examine the rules of the universe itself, because the deeper we look into physics, the less real reality becomes. To understand why the simulation hypothesis refuses to disappear, we need to look at the rules of the universe itself. Not philosophy, not speculation, physics. Because when scientists examine reality at its deepest level, they don't find something solid and continuous. They find something fragmented, discrete, strangely constrained. Modern physics tells us that the universe has a smallest possible scale. There is a minimum length, known as the Planck length, a minimum unit of time, the Planck time. Below these limits, the concept of space and time stops making sense. This is already strange. In our everyday experience, reality feels smooth, continuous, infinitely divisible. But at the fundamental level, reality behaves more like a grid, like pixels, like frames, exactly what you would expect from a computational system. Even more unsettling, the universe appears to have a maximum speed. Nothing can move faster than the speed of light, not because it's inconvenient, but because it seems to be a hard limit. Information cannot propagate faster than that speed, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the speed of light is not just a physical constant, but a bandwidth limit, a maximum rate at which information can update? Again, not proof, but suspicious. Then there is quantum mechanics. At the smallest scales, reality does something deeply counterintuitive. Particles do not have definite properties until they are measured. Before observation, they exist in a superposition of possible states, not here or there, but both. Not moving or resting, but both. Reality, at its core, does not decide what it is until something interacts with it. This is not philosophy. This is experimentally verified. The act of measurement changes the outcome, which means that reality is not fully defined until it is observed. In a simulation, this would make perfect sense. You do not render every detail of a world until it is needed. You conserve resources. You update only what is observed, and the universe behaves exactly like that. When physicists calculate the energy of empty space, they encounter infinities that make no sense. The equations break, as if the universe itself was never meant to be examined at infinite resolution, as if it only supports a certain level of detail. And when we push too far, the system crashes. Black holes are another warning sign. At the center of a black hole, space and time collapse. The laws of physics stop working. Information appears to be destroyed, which should be impossible. Many physicists now believe that black holes are not objects inside space-time, but limits of the system itself. Edges where the rules change, boundaries, even time, which feels so fundamental, starts to behave strangely. In extreme conditions, time slows down, stretches, almost stops. Two observers can experience different amounts of time between the same events. Time is not absolute. It is local, flexible, context-dependent, which again raises the same question. Why does time behave like a variable instead of a fundamental feature? In computer simulations, time is not real. It is an ordering mechanism, a way to sequence events, something imposed by the system, not something that exists on its own. And when physicists try to unify quantum mechanics with general relativity, time completely disappears from the equations. In some of the most advanced theories of reality, there is no variable for time at all, no ticking clock, no universal now. At the deepest level, the universe does not evolve. It simply exists as a static structure, which is impossible to reconcile with our everyday experience. After all, things clearly happen. Stars explode, particles collide, thoughts arise. You are listening to this right now, so how can a timeless system produce a world that feels full of motion and change? This is where the simulation hypothesis becomes powerful. Because in a simulation, time does not flow. The system updates states. Change is not fundamental, it is relational, and what we experience as the passage of time may be nothing more than consciousness moving through a sequence of states, frames. If this is true, then reality is not a place. It is a process, or worse, a finished structure that we are navigating from the inside. And if that sounds unsettling, it should. Because this leads directly to the most disturbing implication of all. If reality behaves like a simulation, then the question is no longer whether we are simulated. The question becomes, who is running the system? And why? That is where the probability argument becomes unavoidable, and it's where things stop being abstract. At this point, the simulation hypothesis stops being a strange idea and becomes a problem of probability. Because once you accept that advanced civilizations can create simulations, you are forced to confront a mathematical reality that is deeply uncomfortable. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom formalized this idea into what is now known as the simulation argument. It is not a theory about computers, it is a logical trilemma. According to Bostrom, at least one of these three statements must be true. First, almost all intelligent civilizations destroy themselves before becoming technologically advanced enough to create realistic simulations. Second, civilizations reach that level, but for some reason they choose not to create simulations of conscious beings. Third, civilizations reach that level and they create vast numbers of simulations, millions, billions, entire universes populated by conscious minds. If the third option is true, then something shocking follows automatically. The number of simulated minds would vastly outnumber the minds in the original reality. And if that is the case, then any randomly selected conscious experience is far more likely to be simulated than real. This conclusion does not rely on science fiction. It relies on counting. One base reality, many simulated realities. Probability does the rest. And this is why many researchers take the hypothesis seriously. Not because they want it to be true, but because, given what we know about computation, it is hard to see how it could be avoided. Look at our own civilization. We already simulate worlds. Simple ones, but still worlds. We simulate weather systems, biological evolution, neural networks that recognize faces and generate language. Every year, our simulations become more detailed, more realistic, more autonomous, and most importantly, more efficient. We don't simulate every detail at all times. We approximate, we compress, we only calculate what matters, exactly what a universe would do if it were being simulated. Now imagine this trend continuing for thousands of years, a civilization that does not collapse, that solves energy scarcity, that masters computation. At that point, creating simulated worlds would not be an experiment. It would be inevitable, for curiosity, for entertainment, for research, for nostalgia. Even if only a tiny fraction of civilizations decide to do this, the number of simulations would explode. And once simulations exist, they don't need to be perfect. They only need to be convincing from the inside, which is a terrifyingly low bar. Because from inside a simulation, you cannot compare it to the base reality. You have no external reference. Everything you observe is part of the system. Every experiment, every measurement, every theory, all inside the same box. This creates a fundamental limitation. There is no definitive experiment that can prove we are not in a simulation. Any apparent inconsistency can always be explained as a feature of the system, a design choice, a limitation, a patch. Even discovering that reality is discrete, pixelated, or computational would not prove anything. A simulated universe would look exactly like that. Which leads to an unsettling realization. If we are in a simulation, the creators do not need to hide. They don't need to watch us. They don't need to interfere. The system can simply run, indifferent, and this removes the comforting idea that someone is in control. A simulation does not imply purpose, it implies process, which raises a final disturbing question. If this is a simulation, why are we conscious? Why not just simulate behavior? Why include subjective experience at all? Some researchers argue that consciousness might be unavoidable once systems reach a certain level of complexity. Others argue that consciousness could be the very thing being studied. Either way, it means something unsettling. We are not accidents, but we may not be originals. And if that is true, then the most important questions are no longer about physics, they are about meaning. Because if we are simulated, then reality did not begin with the universe. It began somewhere else. And whatever exists beyond this reality may not care about us at all, or worse, it might care very much. And that brings us to the final consequence of the simulation hypothesis, because whether this is real or not, it changes how we think about existence itself. At this point, the simulation hypothesis stops being a technical question and becomes a human one. Because if we are living inside a simulation, then the most important question is not who created it. The most important question is, does any of this still matter? If your world is simulated, is your pain less real? Is love less meaningful? Is fear less terrifying? Do your choices stop having value? The answer is deeply uncomfortable. No. Even inside a simulation, experience is still experience. Pain still hurts, joy still feels real, loss still leaves scars. Meaning does not come from being fundamental. Meaning comes from being experienced. If anything, the simulation hypothesis removes one of the oldest human illusions, the illusion that reality revolves around us. If we are simulated, then we are not the center of existence. We are not special. We are not the final layer of reality. We are a process, a pattern of information capable of self-awareness, and that idea disturbs us because it attacks something very deep, our sense of identity. We like to believe that we are unique, that this moment is privileged, that the present is special. But in a simulated universe, there is no privileged now. There is no ultimate layer of reality where everything finally becomes real. There are only layers, and consciousness might simply be what it feels like when information becomes complex enough to observe itself. In that sense, you are not a character inside a simulation. You are the simulation becoming aware. And that realization cuts both ways. On one hand, it makes the universe feel cold, indifferent, alien. But on the other hand, it removes the pressure of cosmic importance. You don't need to be fundamental to be meaningful. A song does not become worthless because it is played from a recording. A dream does not lose its emotional power because it ends. If this is a simulation, then this moment still matters because you are experiencing it. And here is the most unsettling implication of all. If we are simulated, then creating simulated minds ourselves may be unavoidable, which means that one day we might become the creators, and when that happens, the line between reality and simulation will completely collapse, not because reality disappears, but because it multiplies. At that point, the question, "Is this real?" will lose its meaning. The only question that will remain is, what kind of reality are we creating? Because if conscious experience is possible inside simulations, then responsibility does not disappear with fundamentality, it increases. And maybe that is the real message hidden inside this idea. Not that reality is fake, but that reality is deeper, stranger, and less intuitive than we ever imagined. Whether this world is simulated or not, you still wake up here. You still feel time passing. You still make choices. You still care. And maybe that is enough. Because if the universe is a simulation, then it is not a prison. It is a stage. And what matters is not who built it, but what happens inside it. So the next time you hear someone say, "Nothing is real," remember this. Even inside a simulation, experience is real. And as long as something can experience the universe matters, simulated or not.